Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for September 23rd, 2014. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. And today we have some special guests with us, Dan Rubin, Diane Neumann, and Murray. And Dan, can you tell us a little bit about Murray here?
Yeah, well, Murray is a character that we use in our internal security awareness program. We've been running our new program for about a year or so and had some pretty good success. I think we're going to talk a little bit about it later on.
Great. We're looking forward to it. We have joining us online, Jim Clausing. And Jim, how are things in Ohio?
Getting a little chilly today, actually.
Yeah, the fall colors should be coming out pretty soon here. And and here we have John Hogoboom. How are things going with you, John?
Pretty good. You know, helping with some customer events and things of that nature. It's never a dull moment.
All right, good. I'm Brian Rexroad, and let's get right into it here. Jim, you have the first item here. We're going to talk a little bit about, some web server attacks and some characteristics associated with that, huh?
Yeah, this was an article that Dan Sid did over on the security.net blog. We've talked in the past about some compromised web servers being used in distributed denial of service attacks. And this particular attack he observed and wrote about was what they call a layer 7 DDoS. In this case, basically, it was just a bunch of machines that were sending HTTP GET requests and overloading the web server that was being attacked. But unlike the majority of attacks against web servers, it wasn't a whole bunch of compromised desktops. This was another case of compromised web servers, like we've seen a couple of times. But he decided to take a look at the machines that were doing the attacking, and they were web servers, as I said. They were both Windows and Linux boxes running Apache, IIS, Light HTTPD, Nginx. The surprising part, to me especially, was the largest single group of machines doing the attacking were Apache running on Windows. But all of the attackers appeared to be running outdated versions of either Apache, IIS, or PHP MyAdmin or something like that. It was a lot of outdated software used to compromise them, but then this bunch of web servers from all over the place. Again, we've talked in the past, one of the advantages, if you can manage to, as a bot herder, if you can manage to compromise a web server, is you normally have decent bandwidth, big pipes going out, and so that's what was going on here. But I was surprised at the number that were Apache on Windows, with various old, outdated versions of PHP or other software on there. So it was just an interesting look at this particular attack. The fact that they were doing what these guys call the layer 7 attacks, rather than UDP spoofing type attacks, means that they were completing the three-way handshake, so they had to, have some decent bandwidth.
Or at least they were trying to. At least they were trying to. Dan, you had something.
Yeah, Jim, why was it such a surprise that they were running, that it was Apache machines on Windows? Or what would you have expected otherwise?
Well, I would have expected Apache to be Linux. That's maybe just my own bias. When I hear Apache, I think Linux. But a lot of these were running Windows. On Windows, I expect the web server to be IIS. That's just probably my own personal bias there. But
yeah, same here, Jim. I would have thought the same thing. I always sort of assumed that. But as it'd be interesting to see what the demographic is, outside of the attacking, if that was really a contribution to the attack space or not. I don't know, John, you had some experience with the robot attacks, which were sort of the notorious or historical entree into the web source attack activity. Did you happen to have any observations around that?
Well, I mean, sure, there were a lot of servers in spaces where they had an extreme amount of bandwidth.
Right, right.
And usually those servers were hosting multiple websites, so they were very high-powered machines. They had a lot of bandwidth, a lot of power. So if someone could compromise the web server and put some kind of like backdoor web shell on there, which was the typical modus operandi, and then use that to trigger attacks, they could really do a lot of damage with a insignificant number of machines. You know, less than a couple of thousand would really saturate, you know, a potential target.
And it wouldn't really matter what the operating system underneath was, right? I mean, that would be transparent.
Yeah, not really. Most of the time they were
mostly there were really applications even within the web server themselves, right?
Yeah, in that particular situation, it was a lot of those content management systems and some of these other open source packages that you put on top of your web server to do some kind of content management that had vulnerabilities that were exploited, and allows them to drop a file on there that they can then use to do other things.
Yep.
The one thing I was going to say about Apache on Windows, and this is a little tangential to this topic of DDoS, but I know that there are a lot of threat actors out there, particularly in the APT space. I see this all the time. Once they get a machine that's internet facing, could be doing something else for some small business or whatever, they will bring down a bundle that's got Apache in it for Windows, and then they'll run, they'll use that as part of their backdoor infrastructure to maintain, their backdoor or their back office infrastructure for part of their malicious activity that they do. I don't think it's related to this, but it's very common to see big bundles of Apache already like pre-packaged up, so you can just dump them, unzip them, and run them on Windows machines. So you don't even have to install it really.
Okay, very cool. Jim, I think you stumbled on another topic that I wanted to address briefly here. You mentioned the layer 7 DDoS attack, and then also mentioned that it was really just HTTP GETs. And I think, John, you've seen this thing as well. There are really kind of two types of layer 7 attack. There certainly is the case where, as we saw here, basically an HTTP GET where they're flooding traffic, but there is also the possibility of some sort of an exploit against the web server that could just simply take it down, and it may even take just a few packets or a much smaller number. But I think that's significant because oftentimes you get in these discussions about what is a layer 7 attack, and some people are thinking really complex, and others are just thinking, just do too much of the normal thing.
Yeah, and there's a couple of variations immediately that come to mind. So we've seen where instead of just doing HTTP GET, they'll do some sort of GET that hits against the search algorithm within the back. So it tries to do some actual computational load on the back-end web server by hitting some kind of script that's going to make it do a lot of back-end work.
Beat up on the database.
Or fetch a really large file. So if like a website has a big PDF that has all their marketing materials in it, you'll see a smart attacker might do something like that where they just tell it to keep fetching that over and over again, and using up a lot of bandwidth. And if it's HTTPS, it's really hard to mitigate that kind of stuff because you can't peek into the packets very easily to see what's going on.
To deal with that kind of situation. So it's a matter of making sure that you're that you know who you're talking to once you get into the actually supporting queries and an HTTPS scenario. It's kind of interesting because that brings up sort of the trade-off about reliability or integrity versus confidentiality. That is, the tendency is to think you encrypt stuff that's a good thing. It's not always the best thing in cases like this.
Right.
Yeah. So we got a little bit.
There are methods to work around that. You have, SSL accelerators and load balancers that can kind of do some of that, help with that mitigation once they, decrypt what's going on there.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Jim. Let's go ahead over to John here, and we'll talk a little bit about the internet advertising world. And I think you're probably going to have to explain a little bit of this to me.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the best place to start is to kind of discuss what malvertising is, because we've talked about it on previous shows. But if you haven't seen the previous shows, maybe it's a good thing to just kind of refresh everybody's memory. So malvertising is a term that literally means malicious advertising. A lot of legitimate websites, large ones, you'll notice that they have banner ads or advertisements injected inside of the web page that you're visiting. They're basically pulling in advertisements from a third-party advertising network. So they don't really know what ads they're going to be showing to you when you visit their web page, but they'll talk to this advertising network who will supply them with advertisements, and then they are putting that content on their web page for you to see, so to speak.
Yeah, I think, even sometimes I think there's a broker in between there, that they're basically a buyer of advertising and a seller of advertising.
Right, there probably is.
They're basically, so...
Yeah, I was kind of simplifying simplifying it down.
Leave it to me to make it more complex than it needs to be. Go ahead, John.
But in any event, on the right-hand side, you see an attacker on certain occasions.
Very devious, by the way.
Yes,
very devious.
I leveraged some of your Murray artwork here. That's not Murray. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's our bad guy, and he can insert an advertisement if he's clever enough to, on the back-end third-party network. They're not maybe as scrutinized. Some, maybe they make mistakes here or there. They allow somebody to post an ad or pay for an ad, maybe using a stolen credit card or whatever. And then that advertisement gets into this list of advertisements that might be displayed on a lot of big websites. And when that happens, that advertisement can, make it so that a pop-up will occur, or it'll redirect the user to another page that can lead them to get malware installed on their machine. So if you get, as a bad guy, if you can inject your advertisements into a third-party advertisement network that's used by a lot of large websites, you have a better chance of getting more victims. So that's the basic gist of how that works. So this particular story is about a campaign that kind of came out, I want to say, probably 3-4 weeks ago. We didn't get a chance to talk about it. It's another Malvertising campaign. Malvertising is not a new concept. This one just happens to be very successful, so it's probably worth letting people know about. It's called the Kyle and Stan Malvertising campaign. It's named Kyle and Stan for the naming scheme and the malicious domains that they use. So it usually starts with like stan.something or kyle.something, and I think it's homage to
South Park.
South Park, yes, thank you. In any event,
Gone with Cartman.
So they set up this infrastructure. They're injecting ads into these ad networks. And in the initial report that came out from Cisco, it was about 700 malicious domains. Since then, recent news, they've uncovered about 9 times as many. So about 6,500 malicious domain names associated with this activity. And they've infiltrated a lot of large websites. When I say infiltrate, they've been able to inject their malicious ad into these ad networks that are being used by some big websites like Amazon, YouTube, the ads.yahoo.com. So if you visit those websites, there's a chance that when you're browsing there, you'll get one of these ads. It's some percentage of traffic might get that ad. It's not every time you go there. And the other interesting thing about this one is for each time somebody visits it, basic gist is you see the web page, or you see the malicious advertisement, redirects you to another place. First thing it does is check, are you a Windows or are you a Mac, by looking at your user agent, and it will deliver appropriate malware for, which is not common. We don't normally see cross-platform malware. They have versions for both Mac and Windows, and they basically dump a lot of spyware and adware on your machine as the basic gist of, I think, how they're monetizing this this activity. I don't know that there's really much else going beyond that. But in that dropper, those every time it's creating a new piece of malware with a new MD5 sum. So for people who aren't familiar with that, that makes it a lot more different for antivirus companies. It's not the same piece of malware getting dropped every time. Every single time it's a different piece. So they're rebuilding it's rebuilding itself every time for each person, so it looks different. So that's interesting, and it's not using drive-by exploits. They're using social engineering, so it'll pop up something like your machine's running really slow, or you're infected. You need to click here to install the speed PC program. And they're using kind of that Trojan horse kind of thing to say, hey, we're going to give you some piece of software to help your machine run faster or do something, right?
Okay.
And in reality, it's not doing that. It's just installing lots of spyware and adware type stuff. So one to keep an eye out for. Some people probably aren't familiar with the fact that browsing to legitimate large websites could get you potentially infected, especially if you click on the ads. Some of those ads you don't even need to click on. Just viewing it will automatically pop up a new window and redirect you to another web page that is trying to coerce you into getting infected. So
not that we necessarily endorse the behavior, but is that kind of an argument for using ad blocking software?
That is one mitigation way, sure. So I'm not adverse to using advertising blocking software. Also, disabling JavaScript is another option, although that makes a lot of things break on the internet. But that is another way to mitigate that behavior. One of the things I like to do is use sandboxing technologies. So there's a lot of these sandboxing technologies for your browser that help protect it from getting malware installed on it. So
so that's basically a shell that runs around, or your browser runs inside sort of a shell, so it protects it, the rest of the computer presumably, from it, or at least there's less opportunity to break out of that out of that shell.
So then what kind of advice do you give to users about something like that? Because this is ordinary web surfing. You'd be going to a major vendor, major search engine, anything, and this could pop up if you hit that unlucky lottery and the vendors don't catch it in time. So what do you say to somebody who's just wants to use their computer and browse the web as they would normally? And what's the solution to something like this?
You've got to use some of these protection measures that John just went through. Make sure your antivirus is up to date. It might not be able to pick up the thing, but most of the antivirus tools come up with website rating capabilities as well now, so that they can they'll give you a rating when you do search engine, to be able to see which ones have been checked out to be okay. That doesn't necessarily protect you from the the occasional advertising bit that'll come through. This is just a part of the, it's like going out in the city at night by yourself. Just be careful.
Yeah, I've noticed some of the pop-ups are happening where you click the X thinking you're closing it and it's popping up another one, or now there's nothing on a pop-up. There's no close, nothing. You just have to wait, and then a close appears. And hopefully when you close it closes.
Yeah, there's what I would describe as compulsory advertising.
Okay.
And, I guess it really comes down to you get what you pay for. If you're going to sites that are facilitated through free services, it's got to get paid somehow. And I was actually kind of curious whether these malvertisers are actually paying for the clicks that they're getting. I'm presuming that they're kind of, stop and leave kind of scenarios. Somehow it has to get paid for. But And in any case, this is definitely one of those hazards that there isn't exactly what I would describe as a good solution right now. And it's a little bit of luck of the draw. And I think the motivation is actually on the organizations that are using websites that have advertising, they're hosting advertising, and those brokers. The brokers, their reputation is going to be dependent on having quality advertising to post.
Seems like there's an element of user education as well, because if these things that people are clicking on are these kind of do this right away, your computer's in danger, you're in so much trouble, and trying to get somebody to fall for something by scaring them, people can learn to understand and think about what the message that the ad is trying to give them. They might think twice before clicking.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that Murray would probably want to pay attention to. And so I think that takes us over to you, Dan and Diane, about Murray here. What can you tell us?
So Murray is part of our AT&T security awareness campaign that we've been conducting for the past year or so. We're trying to find new ways to reach a group of 300,000 people scattered all over the world who are kind of used to interacting with media and learning about things in a different kind of way than has been done conventionally in the past. We're using a lot of video, we're using a lot of interactive web experiences, sweepstakes, internal communications, all ways to get out this message in a way that people maybe aren't used to. And as you can see, Murray's pretty popular. We've put him on pretty much everything that we can, and I think Diane could talk about a lot of what we're seeing right here.
Well, we wanted it to be motivational, and so we put Murray on a t-shirt. We have microfiber cloths that we made with Murray and his message, and I personally made the stuffed Murray. And the reason I did that was because I just wanted to see if I could. And Murray, as you know, is very lovable, and I thought making him huggable as well would work. And I made the prototype and gave it to my manager, and he's sitting in her office as we speak. My manager said, why don't you make a few more? So I made 4 total, and counting the prototype, that's 5. And I gave him 2 different expressions that you would see on the graphics or the videos. And so he has a badge now, and he has bobble brows.
So Diane, we were talking a little bit earlier about bringing back the little baby, the beanie toys.
Right.
And so we're going to need thousands of them. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
He's in very, very high demand. A lot of people really like Murray. Another thing that we use him for, so we've got on our shirts here and on the cloths, the message, "You are the firewall." One of the things that we try to emphasize, and we were just talking about it before with the web advertising, is that people need to be able to do their part and to be able to recognize when there's a threat. No matter how many Brians or Jims or Johns there are in the world, there's always going to be something that gets through to the normal user. And we're trying our best to make sure that people take a second and think about, I am the firewall. I'm the person who's almost as responsible for security as some of you guys. And by doing small things, I can have a really big impact. And we've found that it's resonated pretty well. People like to know that they're part of something bigger than themselves, and that by doing small things that they can have big impacts.
You lost me just past that point where we aren't normal. But no, I appreciate that.
Well, you guys are super normal. You're different security-wise compared to the normal person out there.
Great.
And also otherwise abnormal. But we could talk about that at a different time. But we brought one of our videos. It's from one of the newer campaigns that we're going to be running. So I think if we run that, we can talk a little bit more afterwards.
Okay, we can do that. I guess the first thing, I've had some experiences online. I happen to be a Facebook user and a LinkedIn user.
Do you have any friends named Rexroad?
No, I don't.
Okay. So you got to watch out for it.
And that's the tricky part. Some of these fraudulent personas actually come on as people that you know and recognize, and they'll steal their pictures and post those pictures. And the one thing that is kind of a clue is, first of all, you might already be a friend with somebody. And they show up again asking to be your friend, and they don't have any other mutual friends, or maybe only a handful. So that's, I think, one of the big clues that you want to look for in cases like this. And I think it's a very good segment. It's a piece of awareness that I think is relatively under the covers right now, and I think it's an issue that's still on the sort of building.
Yeah, I remember we did that story on ThreatTraq probably 6 months ago, a year ago, about the Russian woman who would befriend diplomats and other business people and get into intimate relationships with them and steal their information. You never know. Online intimate, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same one, but there was somebody who, as a pen test, they used a woman's identity to infiltrate a large defense contractor. So using LinkedIn, they were able to kind of friend people that were, in there. And then once those people saw that, oh, she's linked in with people I know, she must work here or something, and they all linked in until she had a huge network, even though it's a fake person.
Wow.
And they were able to use that as a way to, basically gain intelligence and a bunch of other things. We covered that in a show as well, right?
Yeah, and we're using, so this video is the first in a new campaign that we're running, and we kind of cycle our message to keep it fresh with people in the company. We did a few months of careful what you click to make sure that people know about clicking on bad emails and to think before they click on links like we were talking about earlier. We did careful what you keep, which is more of an internal kind of bookkeeping thing about the dangers of holding on to old documents and following company policies, when you get rid of, when you have something you don't need anymore. And now we're doing careful what you share, which is all about making sure the information that you have doesn't get to the outside. And this one in particular, like you said, you never know who's on the other end of your message. So make sure you know that what you're putting out to the world can get somewhere where you don't necessarily want it to be.
Right.
Yeah, and even folks, at home, the one thing that I've always been nervous about and always, told my parents to keep, to cut it back on is posting, like when you're going out of town, to, thieves could then see that you've posted on social media you're going on vacation. That opens your house up to be robbed and that kind of stuff. We hear stories about that.
Right. It's very easily to inadvertently disconnect the sort of the online activities and what that might mean in the physical world. So certainly you want to be paying attention to what you disclose about your physical location and what that might mean to your home when you're away. Absolutely.
To the Reginalds of the world who are looking, waiting for you to go on vacation.
And I feel like I should emphasize that the name Reginald does not have any negative connotation. It was something that we made up that we thought the hacker would be posing as, but we put it in the video and now everyone calls him Reginald. So no offense to anyone named Reginald.
Unlike Murray, however.
Yes, well, Murray is great. He's made his mistakes in his past, and he's kind of learned from it, kind of like the people who work for AT&T have come along with the program. They've learned what they should be and shouldn't be doing, and Murray's in a pretty good place right now.
Yeah. We've made some fun with this, and I think that's part of the objective here, is to lighten up what would otherwise be, totally torture, having to read some sort of a formal letter, protect information and, read this site and this policy and sign off on it. It lightens up the whole process of learning something. And I reflect on, I think, a point that Adam Moroso had made, our chief security officer, that, the opportunity to have everybody in the corporation be a contributor to your security program is a really great opportunity. We shouldn't discount that.
It's not only an opportunity, it's almost necessary at this point.
Absolutely.
So like I said, there are only so many Johns, Jims, and Brians out there, and we need everybody else who's looking at a computer or using a mobile device to think about what the risks are every time they tap or they click on something.
I think we made this point a couple weeks ago when we were talking about this. This is a layer, Murray and the rest of the employee base, is a layer in the security strategy. If we think about a phishing email as an example, the first step, you should have something to block it at the email gateway. You want to try to get it blocked there. It's a very difficult thing to do, especially with the URLs where, the URL may even change what it means by the time it gets inside the enterprise. But that's the first stage. Second stage, it gets on the computer. It should get detected by either antivirus, so that's a second layer, or really having good patch management on the computer to make sure that there are at least a minimum number of vulnerabilities associated with that. You can't get rid of the 0 days, but you certainly can get rid of the ones that are known. So that's our third layer. Then we're depending on the employees as well to make sure that they're paying attention to what's going on. And last but not least, if it's a piece of malware, it's going to try to call home, and so we have the enterprise gateway as a means to try to capture or events that might be taking place within the enterprise as well. So it's a detection strategy. 5 layers of defense here. We should be able to do a pretty good job with that.
Yeah. I think the employees have a misconception that they're in a corporate environment and they're automatically protected. But I think having the campaign to say, no, we need protection from you being the firewall.
Right. Yeah, technology can only do so much.
Right.
Antivirus firewalls, they do that 95, 99% job of stopping all the bad stuff. But still, there's things that are going to get through from time to time, and the humans are really the last part of that food chain of protecting
last
the
part,
endpoint devices.
There's no substitute for good judgment.
Right.
Well, when we talk about advanced persistent threats, those are designed to get around every single countermeasure that we've discussed, every single technological countermeasure, and it really comes down to the last line of defense against the most insidious types of attack are going to be somebody stopping and thinking, wait a minute, let me think about this before I do something, and then making the right action.
Right.
And that's what Murray's there to remind people about.
It's good business anyway, making sure that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, a little bit of an extended segment, but I think worthwhile. It's, I think, a good point. Really appreciate you coming on the program here. And what we're going to do is go into the internet weather for the past week or so here, give a little bit of idea what types of events have been taking place. And most of these are sort of trend type things. There aren't any really, well, actually, there's one event that we're investigating right now. The first one here actually is increase in bytes on source port 1900 UDP. This is SSDP, which is actually the Simple Service Delivery Protocol. And John, you predicted the development of this. I don't remember how
long ago that was, but way before it got to this point.
The spring or the summer. At around June or July, I think I would say that you were kind of looking at this protocol as becoming the sort of the next phase in the basically the distributed reflection denial of service attack strategy.
So either I'm Nostradamus or the bad guys are watching our show.
Or maybe, or maybe you've just been doing your analysis here. In any case, this is in fact activity associated with distributed reflection denial of service attack activity. It's a weak amplifier. We haven't seen it really throw in really big packets, but it certainly is one that the attackers have been able to find lots of sources and en masse have been able to generate these attacks. And you know, the problem with reflection attacks isn't that they can have a potential amplifying effect. It doesn't appear to be really the big case here, but they also help hide the attackers, that it's very difficult to provide attribution back to the real attack source. So that's one of the factors. And it turns out, and I think this is more of a coincidence than anything else, or perhaps it's sort of a systemic issue. A lot of this attack traffic that we've seen recently on this particular port seems to be coming from China. And that might be that there's some type of a device that happens to be exposing that service to the internet and perhaps shouldn't be. So hopefully they'll be able to get something worked to deal with that. With the theme of this, the distributed reflection denial of service attack activity, we're also seeing some spikes in activity on source port 161 UDP. This is Simple Network Management Protocol. We visited this a number of times. Now, just to put it into perspective, that last graph was in the gigabits range, and tens of gigabits actually, where this is still in the hundreds of megabits range, but we're seeing bigger spikes than we've seen previously on this particular, using this, again, this reflection vector here. This one has the potential for more amplification, but it's a more difficult attack to exploit, partly because I think you need to have the what is it, the community name. Yep. Thank you, John.
So Brian, for something like this, where you see something that's notable and growing but not alarming right now, so is the advice generally for people to just keep an eye on port 161 UDP, if they watch traffic coming into their networks, and kind of take action as they see it escalate, or what should people be doing?
Well, there are two perspectives here, and thanks for asking the question, Dan. One is that certainly you want to make sure that you are not offering these services to the internet unless you need to. And if you need to, make sure that you're controlling who can get access to it. That is, SNMP really shouldn't be on the internet. SSDP shouldn't really be on the internet. So you want to make sure that your devices have been tested, anything that's internet facing, to make sure that port's not really available on the internet, because you could become a contributor to the attack. And as a contributor, it could disrupt your network service as a part of contributing. You know, you denial of service attack as a consequential or a collateral damage in effect. So that's one aspect. The other one is that, you know, you should have a DDoS attack defense strategy, and part of this strategy in this case is that you will be able to recognize these reflection attacks because it will come on source port 161 or port 1900 as we showed earlier, and then in the next we'll show that there are some other services that are doing this. So the mitigation strategy, so long as you have enough bandwidth available, is not all that difficult, but you have to have one. So the next graph here is actually a composite of the ports and protocols that are the greatest contributors in this attack activity right now. We've shown one similar to this in the past. On the top of the list is still a large contributor. It's port 123. That's network time protocol. We already talked about 1900 UDP. One of the ports I'm including here is 0 UDP, which happens to be associated with fragmented packets. So in many of these protocols, what they will do is actually send answers that are bigger than a packet size, and it'll get fragmented into multiple packets. And so that's why it becomes a contributor as well. port 53, which is DNS, which is often used in these reflection attack activities. Relatively significant contributor, port 19, which is character generator, Trojan, often referred to. And then last on here is that port 161 UDP. You can't even really see it in the graph. They're just a couple little itsy-bitsy bumps. But the significant one here, as you can see, the dark green is really the big grower here, and that's the SSDP that we had talked about just a little bit ago. Next item here is actually scan probes on port 135 TCP. Now this is associated with the endpoint mapper service, and actually I think it's been basically phased out. Is that right? Phased out of the...
You got me on that one. I'm
Okay.
not sure if it's still in use or not. Maybe Jim knows.
Maybe Jim, you have an answer?
Yeah, it's in newer versions of Windows, it's been replaced using the port 445, but the TCP 135 for the RPC stuff is still seen a lot on older versions of Windows, especially.
Right. So what this really alludes to or suggests is that they're looking for older versions of Windows, perhaps machines that, well, if they're older versions of Windows, they're probably not patched either. And or maybe legacy systems or ones that are under very tight configuration control, not necessarily to the benefit of those platforms, but it would be one, like some of these SCAMP systems might be associated with that, not SCAMP, but SCADA systems, I should say, might be in that kind of predicament. So
I feel like Samba might also still use this, but I could be wrong on that. Samba is the Unix version of
basically
to do the file sharing network protocol stuff with the Microsoft.
It's a possibility. It would have some backward compatibility capabilities as well.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but it's been a while since I've looked
Yeah,
at
well, it does for compatibility reasons, and it's still used some for some of the legacy RPC stuff that's not tunneled over some other protocol.
Okay. So in any case, there's scanning activity here. It's bumped up. Jim, you reported on this last week on ThreatTraq as well. Clearly, we're seeing less activity now than had been taking place throughout the week. Now, just to put this in perspective, this is basically the same graph looking back 90 days, and we'd reported on this back in May and June when this was taking place as well. There was significantly more activity taking place back then. As we did the analysis associated with that, it looked like somebody was actually trying to attack some specific user credentials. Is that right, John?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. We did look at this,
Yeah,
and it
Stan
was
was
using a particular... it looked like something that we had seen once before a long time ago, and we were seeing it again using a particular user credential to try to see if the machine would answer or allow
Murray,
access.
was it?
What's that?
Was that the user Murray? Wasn't
No,
the user
it was
credential?
not, and it wasn't Reginald. But I don't recall what it
wasn't
was.
even Jim Clausing. It wasn't Jim Clausing either.
But you're right. There was an aggressive amount of scanning going on at one point there from a small number of sources. I can't remember the details though.
Right. Now, not to dwell on this port 135 topic here, but just to give a little bit of insight into some of the trending activity. This is the same timeline, the past 90 days. And the concerning trend here is we saw that sort of surge in activity a few months ago, and then starting in July, we've seen an upward trend in the number of sources that are doing this probing activity on a relatively consistent basis. So it perhaps suggests that somebody has found something and they're gradually increasing the bots that they're able to gain from it. I don't have that as actually, it's a pretty strong indication that's possibly the case here. So, next item here is scan sources on port 5000 UDP. We don't really have a known application that's associated with this port. There certainly are applications that are associated with it, but we're not sure what is actually being looked for or conducted in this particular case. We're looking at the last 30 days of activity, but this is activity that just started a day or so ago. I want to make a clear distinction. We've talked a number of times about the network attached storage, the Synology
Distation Manager.
Right, Distation Manager, and they had a administrative port on port 5000 TCP.
Correct.
This is a case where it's on 5000 UDP. Now, we don't know if the attacker was just trying to find those devices and missed. Perhaps it's something else that's going on here.
Right. I don't know. I took a look at some of those sources. They are embedded devices, so it's kind of that pool of Internet of Things devices again. engaged in this scanning activity, but I'm not quite sure what this traffic is yet, and what they're looking for on the UDP port. So.
Yeah. So we didn't want to hold back on reporting it to you, but we don't know exactly what it is yet. It does not look like legitimate activity. It looks like it has some nefarious activity underneath
I would
it.
suspect so, yes.
So partly the reason we wanted to report it to you at this point rather than wait. So let's take a look at the top 10 most probed ports, and in these ports, some pretty standard things. Some of these are associated with reflection attack activities. Port 53 UDP activity is associated with that. Next item is port 22 TCP. This is that Internet of Things looking for weak passwords. Port 445 configure. Port 80 TCP, often looking for these web servers that could be possibly exploited. Port 23, same as on port 22, looking for weak passwords. Next one here, we're going to take a look at the trend on this. It's port 3389, that's remote desktop protocol, and then that's followed by 1433, which is Microsoft SQL database. 443. SSL or HTTPS, and then we already talked about port 135 TCP. Not a whole lot of movement here. We had a few move up, and again, I wanted to show you a little bit of what's going on trend-wise associated with port 3389. Now, this is looking at the last year of activity. We're looking at the number of probes that are taking place on an hourly basis associated with this port, and you can clearly see that there was a significant increase back in, actually this was in February timeframe. It's stayed pretty stable since then. So no bad trend in the upward other than what had taken place back in February. But certainly, clearly, there's interest in this particular port. There are a lot of probes taking place on an hourly basis.
And there are a few worms out there that also scan for this. Mordo is one that's been around for years. It's still out there. If you turn a machine on and listen on the internet, you'll see that there's still Mordo bots out there scanning. Mm-hmm. And they just try like a small list of 30 passwords or something. And if your RDP server happens to be set up with one of those easy to guess passwords, boom, it gets in, then it copies itself to the machine, and then that becomes part of the botnet.
Yeah.
But we definitely see a lot of actors looking for Root Desktop because it gives them full control of that machine, right, and then they can use it for whatever they want.
It's like they're sitting there right in front of your
right.
computer.
Yep.
And and it's convenient because it's part of the Microsoft installation.
Right.
So it makes it easy for people to use it, and unfortunately sometimes it gets exposed by that. Somebody had given us, it was a third party that did this scan, but somebody had given us the results of a scan, had literally thousands and thousands of computers that they didn't do any password guessing, they just walked in effect. And as a part of that scan information, they provided the screenshots. And I was appalled by the number of those that were actually cash registers.
Oh.
So you could actually see what was on the menu at the restaurants and things like that. I didn't, so in any case.
So is that situations like that? Is that somebody who just installed something out of the box and didn't bother to enable any security? Or is that the device itself is configured to be plugged in and used without any sort of protection, and
a combination of both,
changes it?
Unfortunately. Okay. It appears to be that there's not good network protection, not good password management, and there's a good possibility not good patch management as well. So it's a collection of things that contribute to the. We talked about layers of security earlier, and this is a case where there are none.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. So that's it for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at threattrack@list.att.com. You can find us, that is, look for ThreatTraq on the AT&T Tech channel. That's att.com/ThreatTraq. You can find us on YouTube, iTunes, and Twitter as well. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Diane.
Glad to be here.
Thanks, John. And thanks, Jim Online. I'm Brian Rexroad. We'll be back next week with another episode. And until then, keep your network safe.